Thank you, Steve. Yeah.
Yes, just come here for one second. Who's my connection? One of those days. Oh. Yeah.
And got me from that. Hey, big man. I'll do the best I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's a tough day.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh. Like I like that drive, but when you get to Conway, you're like, you got a long way to go to get home. It's like the places in the state, there aren't many, but there's no good way to get there.
No, yes. The number will change because we'll have to go together.
Well, that's what my parents live in, I think, so we'll go down.
All right, check. Everyone hear me? Thumbs up. Awesome. And if you are joining us virtually on Zoom, you could just give a thumbs up in the chat. That would be great. Or let us know if you can't hear me. My name is Shannon Gascoigne. I'm an Amherst resident and JFAC member since 2008. For anyone who may be unaware, JFAC stands for Joint Facilities Advisory Committee. I'm also currently the chair of the committee. I'm happy to have you here with us this evening for the 5th session in a series of monthly community Q&As that have been offered. So the aim of these sessions is to engage in meaningful conversation about the work and recommendations of the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee. So in order to make the most out of the night, we're going to ask that we have a, rather than just listening to me talk and others from the committee, we will ask that you engage as active participants. So that means if you're in the room, engaging with questions during the Q&A portions of the night. If you're joining us virtually, welcome and thank you. You can type your questions into the chat. When we take a pause for questions and answers, we will read those questions into the microphone so that anyone watching this on a playback at a later date or time could hear your questions and the answers. We're going to take frequent pauses for questions and comments. Our session this evening is being recorded and will be posted and available for playback by the end of the week. In prior month sessions, we've spent a significant amount of time formally presenting on the history of the committee and, great, on the history of the committee, presenting the significant needs in our school district, and explaining the process we employ to arrive at the recommendations we presented to the school boards. However, at this point, the school board has accepted our recommendations. They have presented at various meetings, a public thought hearing, and the deliberative session. So I'm going to assume that most of you watching or present have some sense of what is being discussed and what will appear on the March 8th ballot for your consideration. Perfect. And to those of you joining us from Zoom, we'll make certain that you have a good view on our share screen before we kick off with any of that information. So rather than draw the evening out with information that you have already heard, what we're going to do tonight is have a focused discussion that touches on a number of most recent frequently asked questions. So we've had a website and a social media presence for about 2 years that was established with volunteers and maintained by volunteer members of the committee. Since the deliberative sessions last week, we've seen a sharp increase in site traffic and lots of great questions coming in. So thank you to everyone who's reached out. Please continue to send us your questions. As we receive the questions, we are responding directly to those who've asked, and then we're adding those to our Q&A. So our frequently asked questions on the jfac.sa39.org site is constantly replenished with questions as we receive them. So make sure to check back there often. We're thrilled and working to respond to all of those as quickly as possible. So tonight we're going to talk about two of the most frequently asked questions lately, which revolve around construction phasing and cost. We'll present on each and take plenty of breaks for questions and clarifications as needed. So I'm joined here tonight by a number of committee members from the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, also by representatives from Banwell Architects and DEW Construction. Thank you all for being here. Additionally, we have Assistant Superintendents Christine Landwell and Steve Chamberlain with us, and Clark Wilkins Principal and Carol. So a little background information real quick. I know I said I wasn't going to talk too much, but I do want to give just a little bit of clarification, or excuse me, a little bit of a description before I introduce him up here. To discuss phasing, we have with us Mr. Dan Riley from DEW Construction. An RFP went out in late July, and a rigorous multi-step interview process took place, which included the full Facilities Advisory Committee, which included board members, community members, and SAU reps. After reviewing proposals, interviewing firms, the committee unanimously voted to recommend the firm DEW Construction based on the level of detail provided in their proposal, their detailed phasing ideas, the meticulous nature of their estimating process, and their extensive successful record of safely executing public school construction and renovation projects. So tonight, Mr. Riley is going to come up to the podium and just share a little bit about their phasing plans for these projects. We've received a number of questions related to, well, how are you going to keep the kids safe while the building is happening? How are you going to keep, construction vehicles off the road? When will this take place? How will this all happen in a timely fashion? So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mr. Riley.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Riley, I'm General Superintendent for DEW Construction, and joined here tonight with my Kristen Wells, our Project Manager, Matt Lee, our Executive Vice President of Pre-Construction. And this is a great part for us when we're starting to build a project. We get to look at a new design, and we start looking at it as a team, reconstruction and operations. So looking first at the elementary school, as we're building this, I know it's important, Shannon talked about security and safety. There's nothing more important to us, and it's in this order. As we're creating our plans, we're going to learn their operational needs, but first and foremost is the safety of the students, the staff, and our workers, and it's in that order. So when we're building this plan, looking at the existing school here under white, you'll see the outline of the classrooms and the green area in the back, which is the first phase of work of the new build. So the first thing we'll do, we'll come in the summer, we'll create our access road, and we'll create our laydown area with a perimeter fence, which will keep construction operations completely isolated from the school operations and school activities. So that separates us from the students and staff. Also, that egress path, that road that's running around there, we'll get traffic in before your school operations start. Our workers will go out at the end of the day, so it won't be the co-mingling. It also gives the opportunity where you see orange arrows in front for traffic to continue, and construction traffic will not interfere with the operational traffic for the school. Again, the perimeter fence, you'll see our laydown area in the back. There is options for, we talked about playground areas, field areas, and we'll be looking at that, especially as the civil drawings are finalized through the design period after 12. So this would be the first phase of work. This would happen the first year. And then in the second year, we flip flop. So that temporary access road becomes the access road to the now operational school that we built. The back area becomes a parking area, swing space, and the whole front area becomes our other construction zone. And that's where we'll be building the larger portion of the school and completing the work. And at the end of summer 2025, we're gone and we've upgraded the facility and a new home and a great environment for your students. Any questions on the elementary school and the phasing? Yeah. So if there's anything, we'll go back to it, but for right now, we'll just move on to the middle school. So we've broken this out. You'll see the legend on the left-hand side for summer 2023. That's the orange boxes, 1, 2, 3, and 4 that correspond. I'm going to flip to the second page where you'll see a lot of orange. Our plan is going to be as aggressive as possible the first summer and complete as many areas as we can. That will include starting the addition in the front through those areas. And then after the summer, you'll see that we have work that's happening during the school season. What we're going to do is methodically work our way around the school, small areas that again, we've isolated and we've worked out safe paths of egress for our construction activities that completely separate us from the student activities, where we can put up barriers and still maintain life safety for the students. And we'll just, again, we'll take small areas of the school, we'll complete those areas, move on to the next area. And then in the final summer, we'll be joining it all. So that's when we'll move into the corridors, tie the flooring in together, tie the ceilings all in together. And again, at the end of summer 2025, we'll be wrapping up this project.
Thank you, Dan. Does anyone here have any questions on anything Dan's presented so far? All right, thank you.
Hey, Lisa Eastland, 19 Road, Amherst. So it appears that the middle school is all internal work. So if I live in a surrounding neighborhood, how much am I going to be impacted during the summertime? Like, how much of my dog's going to be barking? That's really what I want to know.
Great question. Most of it is internal work. We do have quite a bit of work on the exterior. It would be a new roof, new windows, mechanical units. Most of the operational activities we'll start with work within the noise ordinance, whatever it is for the town. Construction activities for us are usually, especially during the summer, 7 to 5-ish, depending on the scope of work and what's happening.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We have dog misses in the trailer.
Do what?
We have dog misses.
And
Yeah.
John's districts in the construction
I mean, but
trailer.
the same question
No,
goes for
that's great.
if
Yeah.
I live in the village too. Like, how much beep, beep, beep am I going to be hearing all summer long when I have no air conditioning and windows are open? But you're saying it is one summer, or is it 2 summers of that?
So let's break it down. So if we're looking at the middle school, the first summer, if we're performing the roof work, and if we're performing the windows as we're going around, it's going to be pretty selective. The roof work in the summer will be pretty heavy. There'll be quite a bit of noise. That'll be probably the largest undertaking. We're putting new mechanical units on the roof. There'll be a couple of crane picks, but there's not a lot of noise. Most of it really is inside the school at the middle school.
How is it for this
So
site?
going back here,
Yeah,
this
thank you.
is going to be a little different. So it's going to be quite a bit of noise, ongoing activity, because we don't have a shell. We don't have a structure. We have to build that structure.
Right.
So we're going to have a lot more site work going on, a lot more heavy equipment. There will be noise.
Thank you.
Great question. Do we have anything coming in on the Zoom? Okay. I have a question, or kind of I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So if you go back to the middle school, the purplish and the red, so those are large sections of real estate within the building, that's the summer work.
Correct.
Okay. Great. And then when you talk about making it safe and life safety, so I'm envisioning like plastic, you know, like how are you separating the work that happens during the school year from the students and staff? And then how do I know that a random person in the school is a member of your construction crew?
Great questions. So I'll address the barriers first. Barriers, what we were looking at here for phase A would be hard barriers, not just plastic. We would pre-build sections, plywood them, paint them white, and put them in the corridors and secure them to the floor, to the walls. And this way, it's a solid barrier, a solid separation. As far as identification, besides all of the workers on site being background checked, we want to make sure they're all easily identifiable. We've done this plenty of times, different types of facilities, schools, other types of operations. We've had great success with whether it's hard hat identification, photo ID, or photo ID on armbands. We'll go over all of that with the school board, with the team as we move forward and see what works best. But our goal is to make sure that all of the construction workers on site are always easily identifiable to you.
Thank you.
Are the only people
Then I'm
inside?
going to ask you to talk into the mic for anyone watching at home.
Dan, can you address who is inside the school? If you have to get inside the school during school hours, how do they enter and sort of announce themselves and who escorts them?
So thanks, Matt. Great reminder for me. When we do have to go in, it's usually mechanical or tie-ins or for shutdowns. We will coordinate all of that typically with the principal of the school. That would be myself, or another superintendent, or a foreman would escort the other workers in. We would always communicate up front why we're going into the operational school, how many people we're going in, the purpose we're going in for, and the duration we would be there.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Ms. Eastland.
Hi, I have one last question. It's less about like the money we're gonna spend, but I just was thinking about when my youngest was a little boy, I learned more about construction equipment than I ever wanted to know, really. But he loved it and he loved going to building sites and watching it happen. Is there a way or how, when you're working on schools, particularly for the younger kids, how can we incorporate that into like their curriculum or like, hey, let's go talk to construction workers or let's have somebody come into the school classroom and tell us about what they do. Like, is there a mechanism for that to happen?
There absolutely is, and it's just usually an invitation. Let us know what we can do to involve you in the process. This really is, for some of these students and for a lot of the teachers, this is going to be a once in a career, once in a lifetime opportunity. I wouldn't be standing here right now if it wasn't for a teacher. When I was growing up, I had a teacher who took us out to a construction site, and I was hooked. I went out on that site. We all got to walk through the building together, talk to the local builder. And like I said, I wouldn't be standing here otherwise if it wasn't for a teacher. So as far as us being able to give back and participate with the students, we've done this at plenty of schools. We've hosted and been part of assemblies and talked about the process, shown them pictures, brought up pictures of equipment, excuse me, pictures of mechanicals, how we do some mechanical coordination. So it really blends in well with the STEM program. And we've also gone into classrooms when we were asked that, fortunately, the last school we built together, we had the opportunity to go into a lot of classrooms and have conversations about promotion, et cetera, and set up things for the students to learn. And it was a great experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You go to the Wilkins slide. We have someone on Zoom just wanting to see that again.
Sure.
Great.
First picture is that.
I think so.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions while we have Dan?
Oh, I have one last one, sorry.
No, you're
Sorry.
great. No, bring it on. This is what tonight is for.
Well, I'm gonna ask it publicly because I did ask sideline. Looking at Wilkins and building access roads and things like that, how do you keep dust and dirt and all of that kind of stuff down? Like, how do you suppress that?
So on the temporary roads themselves, or do you mean
Just
construction?
throughout the whole project, like how do I not have to dust my house all the time because I'm getting dirt from the Wilkins
Yes.
project?
So site contractors will we'll have water trucks on site, and we'll be wetting things down. We want to keep the dust down as low as possible.
Okay.
Throughout the whole process. It's environmental air quality,
Okay.
so it's important to us, yes.
Okay, we have a question on the Zoom. I'm going to hand the microphone to Beth so everyone can hear.
So taking a look at the AMS timeline, right? There was that very clear timeline that was outlined on the side.
Yes.
The Wilkins one doesn't have that. So can you explain, go back to the Wilkins slides again, and just explain why that timeline isn't there, but maybe explain a little bit more detail again about what's happening when and why that color-coded timeline isn't there.
Sure. We have more detail for the middle school because it's multi-phase. We're breaking it up into smaller phases, smaller batch areas to construct. For the elementary school, if we're starting in summer 2023, we're concluding in summer 2024, and it's going to be that box that's in the back. So it's really just in 2 phases versus 13 phases, or what the middle school is exactly. So we'll have the phase 1, which is the rear, and phase 2, which is the front. And that's our timeline.
1 year duration.
1 year duration for each.
Okay, oh, there we go.
And I'm assuming part of the reason why that question was asked, so just to understand like who's when and where and what building and why, we should probably take what's outlined here in terms of the build sequencing and start to show like 5th grade students are in the middle school up until this point. Once this gets completed, they move here. Clark is still open. We still have preschool and kindergarten kids here, but when the new building's developed here, we'll move them there. I think we probably have to have that plan already.
Yeah, so a lot of that. Dan, you jump in if I'm mistaken here, but some of those finite details happen post-bond because there's still design work that you're working through and, ordering and things like that, but
Yes.
you jump in.
That's what I was gonna say, that falls back also for us for learning their operational needs. So we'll learn after more of the operational needs, and we'll drill into the finance. You'll see on these plans that they all say draft. And again, once we have final civils, we'll tweak this, we'll finalize this, and the same with the swing space where students are and be able to lay out long commission in the future.
So just to clarify, when you're talking operational needs, we're talking about, when can your guys get in? When does school start, right? Like, what's the first day of school? What community things are happening that you need to avoid? We're talking, which buildings throughout all of the district-owned buildings are available when? Those more finite details. Is that?
Yes, it's less about our operational needs to build a school. We'll build a plan around you. So once we understand what your operational needs are, that's what helps us build out. So your start times in the morning, your bus arrival, your parent pickup and drop off, all of that weighs into our final plans.
All right. Anyone online? Anyone else in the room? Any other questions for? Well, thank you so much. And again, for folks tuning in virtually, or if you're someone who is watching this in the recording, after the fact, send us a question on the Ask a Question feature at jfac.sau39.org, and we will connect with DEW to make certain we get those answered. Okay. So the next big question that we're certainly getting a lot lately is related to cost. So, there's a number of questions about, well, what would it cost us to maintain the buildings we have? Because part of this committee And part of the work that we're doing and part of what we really grappled with was the fact that we have significant needs throughout the Amherst School District and the South Egan Cooperative School District as it relates to our buildings. So we have multiple systems that are coming end of life. We've seen videos of leaky roofs at the middle school. We have portables that house 88 students that are also reaching end of life. So what would it cost us just to maintain the buildings we have? So essentially to kick the can down the road. So we had a number of subcommittees that were formed, and one subcommittee looked closely at this, and that was headed up by Brian Coogan, a resident and community volunteer. So Mr. Coogan's here with us tonight. He's done a cost analysis, and I'm going to ask him to come to the microphone if he doesn't mind and walk us through that. We also have these slides available online and some videos kind of adding a little color.
Thank you, Shannon. You actually have the slide?
I do have her slides.
Sure. This kind of came to me when we were at the Delivers last week. There were a lot of questions around costs and what's the new build cost, what's the renovation cost, what's the current facility cost, and this is something that as we looked at this project over the last 3+ years, we've tried to factor in what's the investment from the community, and it was never really about building schools. It was about developing the right curriculum for the community at the most appropriate and cost-effective way to deliver that, which is why we looked at building new, we looked at doing nothing, we looked at renovating, we looked at, a mishmash of all these different things. And as we started to lay those plans out, before these committees even kicked off, there was an assessment done back in 2017, looking at the entire district's facilities and starting to estimate which of those systems are nearing end of life, and then what would the cost be as of that point in time, which was 2017, to replace or repair those. And the reality is many of the systems in some of these schools, they're so aged, you can't even repair them. They don't have parts to purchase to fix them. Which when we took a tour of AMS, there was a shop there. The shop person was making the parts to replace or repair the things that were broken. So that's how much of the state of disrepair we are at some points here. So what I tried to do is look at this 20-year plan and each and every single line item that was being suggested or required to be replaced, and try to put an actual cost against it. So, something cost $100 last year, if we put like the building estimates here, they generally are between 3% and 5% year over year. Well, if it cost me $100 last year on a conservative end, it's going to cost me $103 this year. Keep kicking that expense down the line, it's going to go from $100 this year to $103 next year to 20 years, it's going to be $180. And that's how much it compounds over that sort of duration. So when you look at a school and building or repairing elements of the school, something that may have cost $200,000 10 years ago, may cost $2 million 10 years from now. So it really just starts to shift and change. And when I started to look at all those factors and started placing each of those line items with those cost estimates compounding over the duration of time, what really stood out to me was just getting 20 years from now, the town is going to be on the hook for paying $86 million to maintain Clark, Wilkins, and AMS. That's just to maintain it. It's not getting anything incremental. It's not putting in higher efficiency products. It's not expanding spaces. It's not augmenting footage to more appropriately educate students. It's keeping everything as it is today, but bringing it up to maintenance level. You're going to spend $3 million more for maintenance, and you're going to pay $86 million over 20 years versus spending $83 million over 30 years for a renovated space that's increased in size. It's providing more economical facilities. You're having less electricity usage, less
fuel consumption. You're gonna have larger spaces for the students, for the faculty. You won't have barrels collecting water in libraries because typically water and books don't really mix well together. That's what mix them up and turn them into paper mache. It's just one of these things. It's like, the more I look at it, I heard this, oh, it's the chicken or the egg. This is not a chicken or egg. This is either a dozen eggs that are already cracked and rotten if you just keep kicking the can down the road, or you can actually make something with the product if you make the time to invest in these. So those are the statistics I ran. If you start to push this out 30 years and all the other incremental costs will come up in the following 10 years, once 30 or once 20 ellipses, you're pushing upwards of over $100 million for other elements that'll have to be renovated in that next 30-year time span. So I don't know how else to put it. This is just math. It's a simple math equation that, to me, on paper, it looks like a pretty good deal if you start to make some investments for the community. That's the right thing for the community to do. And we've said all along, we've tried to take the best interest of the entire community and be very cost conscious with the decisions that were made, because we're residents, we're taxpayers. It's not like we want to give money away. We want to see good education. We want to see good value in the community. And these, we believe, are the best choices to make for the residents moving forward. So I'll pause if people have any questions on how I computed this, or you want more information, I'm happy to address.
Just for everybody watching at home, I'm just going to show a couple. For everybody watching at home, I'm just going to show a few of these slides, as well for people in the room, I guess. These are how Brian came up with his numbers. This shows the AMS kick the can cost. Down at the bottom, you see the grand total of 31. This is the Clark Wilkins, so it includes Clark and Wilkins added together, grand total of 33. So here we show the 33 plus the 31 is 65. And then the 3% construction that Brian discussed, and that brings us to 86.6. I think that's at the deliberative. I know that 65 was mentioned at the deliberative for the cost, and that would be the cost if we had done this today without the escalating costs moving forward.
All right, thanks, Brian. Anyone in the room have a question or on Zoom for Brian regarding this analysis? Okay, I have a note on this. So the 65 million, that was if we did everything right now all at once. So what you've done is you stretched it out.
Caveat that 65 million will be if you started it in 2017.
Because that's when the capital needs assessment was created.
That's when the capital needs assessment was made, and that's what the cost estimates for those parks were in 2017.
Okay, good point. So the other thing that when we discuss this, that I think it's important to note is we just got done having a discussion about phasing and the impact that would have to students. And we know that for 2 years, we will have disruption. There's no way around that. Construction and renovation does cause disruption to the student experience. However, if we stretch these projects out over 20 years, we're talking about continuous disruption every year that we're working on a small Band-Aid project that we need to do to maintain the buildings, right? So we're talking about musical classrooms for decades.
You are, and you have an opportunity cost when doing these projects all together at the same time in the logical sequencing, because you're opening up the envelope of the facility. The cost to fix, repair, update, maintain it is far less expensive than if you do this section today, this section 6 years from now, that section, decade and a half later. You're going to be repeating costs to do the same amount of work versus doing all of it in one cohesive program.
Great, and I see that the team from our cost estimating team kind of nodding. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that math that Brian missed, or did we capture it all? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Brian, for your work. Anyone have a question? Comment? Okay, so we have some other questions, so that's great. So these were the two items that we really wanted to hit on tonight in terms of a formal presentation. But the night really is about what other questions are out there. And so without further discussion then on the kick the can, thank you again, Brian, for that. We'll hand the mic over to Beth so she can ask questions from the Zoom. I'll moderate the Q&A and then I'll hand the microphone to the team, to the person most suited for the question.
So a lot of people are hearing this for the last, for the first time over the last week or so since deliberative. So there's questions on what environmental sustainability investments are being made with the new schools, for example, solar, geothermal, and things like that. And why was the decision made about each of these?
Great. Okay, so I'm going to switch mics here. 1 second. All right, so thank you for the question. So the question then is, what are we looking at in terms of environmental sustainability for the future? So one thing that wasn't mentioned, we're talking a lot about warrant article 12, but warrant article 13, is that correct? Warrant article 13 is the warrant article for solar. So solar has been considered. It was a really tough recommendation for the committee because sustainability was important. However, part of our charge was, what do we absolutely need to provide the best educational outcomes for the students, and is solar really a community decision to make? Does the community need to kind of weigh in on that? So the board opted to pull that out as its own warrant article to let the community have a voice in if that's something that is important and valued here in the town. In terms of geothermal, I don't know that was explored to any great depth. It's very, very costly on the front end. So I think that was.
There wasn't enough evidence locally to support the investment.
And I'm reminded here that there wasn't enough evidence locally to support the investment. But I'm seeing some nodding heads from the committee, so anyone who would like to chime in if I've left something out, please feel free to come up to mic. Again, we're just having a conversation tonight, folks.
Purely from a sustainability perspective, if you're looking at the energy consumption, so by upgrading all of the facilities, so from a heating, cooling, airflow, you're improving all of your energy efficiency, just reducing our reliance on whether it's petrol, fuel, or other. In the lighting aspects, by replacing all the windows, you're increasing the energy efficiency of the windows. So from a heating and cooling perspective, your need for energy is lessened, and then the faculty of the machinery is actually more efficient. You're double out on that. From a lighting perspective, you'll actually get much more energy efficiency out of the lighting by replacing the lighting with more upgraded lighting that gives you far less energy wattage. So overall, the entire facility's energy consumption should go down significantly. Not only is it good for environmentally, but it's also good for your bottom line, for your outward expenditure year for rent costs. For everyone like this?
Oh, no, I think that answers that. I have other questions that just popped up about that.
Yep, Barbara.
No, I've got two. So that's what I get. Okay. Okay. So what interest rate is being assumed?
That's a great question. We did not assume any interest rates on those, so they're just building cost estimate increases. So we, in the document that's available on the JFAC website, we actually stipulated in there, and it's probably in this document somewhere. We did not look at interest rates, regardless if you're borrowing money to renovate these schools for proposal 12, there's an interest rate effective with that. When I looked at this, I considered interest rates, but the fact that all of the other projects that were slated for the next 20 years would be on most likely 15 to 20 different warrant articles, I couldn't forecast out what interest rates might be in each of those years. Some years have much higher costs than others. So the complexity of adding that, it was caution to the wind. I couldn't forecast that. So what I can tell you is we're at historically low interest rates still today. Those might most likely continue to rise over the next 5 to 10 years. What to do beyond that, I can't tell. I don't have the magic wand, but I can tell you that building costs are going to go up.
Bond. Talk about the bond, what rate that's gonna.
I can't say what the rate's going to be because we don't know yet, John. I wish I could. It's gonna be, if this article were to pass,
No.
So the bonds that we're putting forth, the most recent project that went through was at a 2% rate. So the numbers that we have shown are at that same 2%.
That's what.
What impact is the current inflation rate on the proposed bond issue? What is the current inflation rate on the proposed bond issue?
I don't think that's a question that we could address. I mean, we're not economists, we're not looking at inflation rates correlated to the bond.
DEW construction has put in some contingencies to try to capture costs moving down the road. And typically, we've, like Brian said, it changes every year, but we have factored somewhere around 4% per year to get us out in time. So does that answer potentially the question? Maybe?
That's okay. I think you might be able to answer this.
What are the future costs estimates for maintenance or energy use? This is back to the solar question. Should this be included in context for the vote on solar?
That's not me.
Those are operating expenses for the facility themselves, and we'll factor on how large the buildings are, the use of the buildings, do we like temperatures at 68 or 62, and there's a lot of factors to that. We have some numbers on what they have historically, but with a new facility, you won't know what those will be. I think they have some projections, but some of those decisions haven't been made yet because the selection of what products you put into the building haven't been finalized. Some will have higher efficiency rates than others. They also come at cost.
I do know they are not misspeaking, but our historical energy use was used as part of the return on investment calculation.
All right, great, thank you. Any other questions?
No, not that I have. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'd like to do right now is, because you heard Brian and I answering quite a few of those questions, I'd like to ask members from the team, maybe Brad Prescott from Banwell, to just come in and fill in any of the gaps that we may have missed, particularly around some of the earlier questions. I saw you in the audience, Brad, and you were taking notes and nodding your head, so if you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try to add a little bit of color to a couple of items that were mentioned. So I'm going to go across multiple subjects here, so I apologize. Stop me if I go too fast. In terms of the estimating of the inflation costs, I think it's important to congratulate the community on making the smart choice in hiring a construction firm, a construction management firm to do their cost estimates. Because DEW has real-time information from their day-to-day activities where they're constructing projects right now. So they have real-time estimates on what the materials would cost in a school like this. That doesn't mean they have a crystal ball, nobody's perfect, which is why they have construction cost estimates, which include contingencies. So there's a certain amount of percentage contingency that has to be built into the estimate at this juncture because we're continuing to develop the price, develop the design, because it's an evolutionary design. And as we continue to refine the design, those contingencies get smaller and smaller because we know more. We also get closer to the construction date. So I think there's a lot of good things there. The team does know that the guaranteed maximum price, the bond vote, is the price. It cannot go higher than that. It's going to either go down, it's going to go down. We're going to find a better price than that. But the team does know and has done an estimate with the confidence that they can build this school for that price or less. And and any excess funds, if we when we build for less, go back to the community. So that kind of fills those blanks. Sustainability, I think, just to talk about a few other features, it's sort of the Goldilocks scenario when it comes to sustainability. You want to hit it just right. You don't want to go too far outside and spend too much without enough return on investment. But at the same time, you don't want to go too skinny and then you have a wasteful building, right? So we've done a careful job of trying to, at this early phase, design a building and a narrative for a building that could be priced, that the return on investment was reasonable for the community. It was also have a lot of sustainable features. We live in a state that actually has a very good energy code. So we've, of course, adhered to the energy code and are compliant with that. And then the community has selected to go a little bit beyond that with high efficiency HVAC systems, which I think was a very smart return on investment because it changed from these HVAC units that are in every single classroom that are very small and inefficient to a central system that can be much more efficient and serve the students better, not only as a conditioning system, but also as a ventilation system in these difficult times of COVID that we're facing. The level of sustainable features is different on different buildings because we have two different types of buildings here. We have an elementary school, which is an entirely new building, with the exception of the 10,000 square feet that we're retaining. So that's envelope of that sandwich is going to be very different than when you renovate a building and you're keeping the skin, but working on the skin of the middle school to upgrade it a little bit with windows, etc. But the roofing, the new roofing, and the new insulation that's going to go on the roofing is going to make a huge difference in terms of energy efficiency of the overall building and the cover. I think a lot of people are going to be astonished at how wonderful the comfort is going to be in a brand new elementary school versus this sort of leaky vintage environment that they teach in right now. You can do so much more with conditioning, with less conditioning, in a tighter building that we're going to be constructing for you than what you have right now in this vintage building. So it's really going to be a wonderful environment. Other sustainability features, just running through a quick list. We talked a little bit about the lighting. That's the LED lighting. State code requires occupancy sensors right now. So that means the lights are only coming on when somebody's actually in the room using those lights. Lighting sensors, so only the lights that are need to be turned on, so the one maybe near the window are turned off, right? Because you've got sunlight coming to the windows. We have high efficiency windows of glass, so we limit how much solar radiation is coming into the building and how much we have to cool the building. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I think what's important here to talk about is that it's that Goldilocks scenario we were saying. We tried to pick the right amount of sustainability that had the best return on investment for your.
And just to be clear, you're talking about what code requires and the sensors, for example, because of when our existing buildings were built, they don't fall under those codes, right? They're grandfathered in with some of this, or help me understand that.
Yeah, so basically, we do have to fall under the energy conservation code, even especially for the new elements of an existing building. So either way, we still have to follow the code, and it's a percentage thing. So, but in an existing building, everything that you put in new has to be compliant.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to put you on the spot like that. Beth, do you have any other questions online?
All right, anything else from anyone in the room or on the committee? I see some sidebar happening. Do you have any other questions that we want to?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, here we go.
So I was just clarifying with Brian on the kick the can things, because I've seen so many people like, well, if we need a new roof, why don't we get a new roof? So I wanted to make sure that like what his numbers were a la carte numbers. So if we wanted to go fix AMS roof, whatever, one of them, I don't know what MEP stands for, but I saw that and that was like 11.
Yeah, so MEP, which was on one of these slides, is Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing.
Okay, so to say, well, why don't we just fix the roof? Well, okay, that would be 3 million. And if we want to fix that, well, then the next election, so it's all a la carte, like we're picking from a menu. And at the end of the thing, in 20 years, that whole thing is what's gonna cost us. So I just wanted to clarify, that's what I was reading how I was reading that.
Can you go, up one, you go to the graph slide? Yeah, right there. So, and I wish it wasn't just green on green, but the dark green, is that consistent value? That's effectively the bond payment year over year. If Warren Article 12 is approved, that's the number that's going to impact your tax rate. So what you'll see is, the first 5 years here, from 2022 to 2027, it's pretty low impact if you don't approve this. But come 2027, because a lot of the mechanical and electrical and plumbing is coming end of life, you're going to have 30 million to pay for in that 1 year. That's a huge chunk. And then 3 years later, you're going to have another 8 or 9 million. And then 2 years later, you have another 5 million. It's just this consistent thread of, well, this thing just fell down. This thing just broke. It's that 86 Jeep you drove that all of a sudden, like, the muffler went, and then it's the water pump, and then the radiator goes, and you got to get another transmission like that. We're driving the 86 Wrangler. That's what we have. And it's an awesome car. I love it. Right? It's a fantastic vehicle. I'd love to hold on to it, but at some point, it becomes like a project. It's like a pet. Like, I'm willing to pay extra to keep my 86 Wrangler on the road. It may be, not even street legal any longer, but it looks cool. Well, that's unfortunately the reality that we're in right now, is that we've got a really cute little village school here that looks, quaint in the village, but the reality of this is it no longer serves the students of the community. And that's, we've outgrown it. And these are the real impact costs. And these are what I refer to as true costs. This is what it's going to cost you if you delay. And these are costs that we can't avoid. Like, these aren't nice to haves. These are like, you have to do this, or the school is not going to be accredited. Like that, this is the reality of it. So, like, if you don't have working electrical or plumbing, that you can't have a school.
Right, it becomes an environmental health and safety issue at some point. But I think the most compelling thing to me when I looked at this chart, and you hit on this, Brian, just a little bit, we're making investments in our building regardless. That's our responsibility as residents of this town. We have to maintain our public infrastructure. But on the chart, I'm sorry, we can make a consistent investment, and we can, kind of predict what that tax rate will look like. And it is an investment. There is no ignoring that. Or we can have these spikes, right? Where we're taking care of things kind of when we need to, as we need to, sort of in crisis mode.
I have one last question, and maybe it's for Anna, because I've heard a lot of people talk about this. The videos and the stuff on the JFAC website says, and it was a deliberative, is we have educators going to classrooms, special educators, or specials like music and computers going to classrooms on carts. If you don't have a kid in that classroom, like, what's the big whoop? So how does that affect education for the kids who are learning music, not in a proper music room or in a proper computer room, if the teacher's having to come to their classroom? Like, why is that an issue?
Thanks everyone for your patience with the mics. We learned here after the October session that if we're not talking directly into a microphone, the recording afterwards is worthless.
So thanks, Lisa, for putting me on the spot. So I would say a lot. One is lost instructional content. We have a conference room right next to the music room, so just the interruptions for where people are and that interference with the noise. If students are constantly going into small, inadequate spaces, also takes away from the instruction.
So there's, a lot all the time, just the amount of lost time from the porta potties in and out of the classrooms, not adequate bathrooms, having to travel, down the way. So a lot of lost quality instructional time.
Is there also a limit on what he's able to teach from his avatar?
So the question was, is there a limit to what some of our, so basically, anytime we have a grade come through that requires a classroom that's not available, a specialist who may have a classroom space goes out of their room and onto a cart. So, does that limit what can be taught?
Sure, and if we're talking technology, like moving from different classrooms, just the lost instructional time that way, just even the construction of a building, not having grade levels together and able to have that collegiality and opportunity to share students between teachers. So that the building in ways are inhibiting some things that are just basic opportunities in other schools.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, special education, again, the amount of space that we need for small groups, the changing needs of special education and sensory rooms and spaces that aren't adequate for those needs that we have for our students.
I have one last question about that. I always have questions. You should never ask questions. Just the last part of that is, how effective is the teacher's time during that specialist time? If I'm the teacher and I have my kids running around the classroom doing music with scarves, what does that do to my planning period, my grading period, my ability to meet with parents over Zoom, to have meetings, meet with other teachers to collaborate? Like, how does that work?
So currently, if we have our specials in the classroom, so like you said, teachers are displaced from their classroom to have that happen. So they're not able to do all the things that you said in the planning. In the classroom, getting prepared for the next classes and activities. Again, it takes away from that. Or we have Zoom meeting, parent meetings. You'll see behind the stage, we have set up what's called a Zoom room to try to be able to have teachers find a spot to have communications with parents as you're looking at the bathroom cleaner, behind you, and the acoustics for that. So we're all day long looking for space. If my office is open, people are taking it just to be able to do the daily functions, communication with parents, just outside of the classroom.
So I'm going to ask you to hold on to the mic real quick because this touches on this trying to find space in the building and something that I think is important for residents to hear and understand. At the deliberative last week, we saw a chart that showed that most of our grades were hitting their class size targets. So if you look at that chart in a vacuum, that would say to me, well, we're good. We're hitting class size targets. So would you mind talking through how can you hit a class size target but not have room in our buildings? What does that mean?
Sure. So higher class sizes and hitting those targets. So if we had, see if I'm understanding you correctly, to have 5 more students in a classroom, and what that does for a teacher instructionally?
No, but that's a great question. I guess what I'm driving at is right now we have the appropriate number of staff to have reasonable class size ratios throughout most of our grades. But what is that coming at the expense of? So for example, someone in the closet, someone in the hallway, 3 people in an office,
Yes, certainly, and the class size, the classroom space is number one. So if we needed another classroom next year, we wouldn't have space without putting somebody on a cart. So we have, and you can see from the videos, we have many people not in the adequate spaces. We have 4 special ed teachers in a given classroom, 3 separate given classrooms. We have our school psychologist in the old custodial closet with the ladder going up, and she does testing. So yes, classroom space, but everybody is kind of bulging.
And at Clark, you have all of your specials running in the cafeteria.
Yeah, and the other day, I don't know if Lisa was there subbing, but you have the ice outside, and it's like, oh, why didn't we have this solved issue before? It's because we used to be able to go into the multi-purpose room for additional need in the morning, but now it is all 4 specials and our lunch program. So that is off for any kind of other services throughout the day.
Great, thank you. I see a question in the audience.
Just a question about that chart where in 2027 we have that large spend that we'll need to do for maintenance. What happens if, say, 2026, the board says, okay, we need to do a roof, and we put in $4 million for a roof, and the voters say no, and then that roof fails? We obviously have to fix that roof. Well, how does that work, like budget-wise? We take that out of, we get rid of something in our regular budget?
Things that are required to maintain our school having open doors have to happen. So for example, this year, our budget is currently frozen. It's frozen because we have needs that exceeded our expectations. So in that case, if a roof were voted down and then our roof had, gaping holes and we could not open our school doors because of that, that becomes the #1 priority that we have to fund. In many cases, it ends up impacting general education.
So that would mean for, like, say it happened for this year's budget, that's all of, like, any of the, Mr. Allgorden needed some new wherever they play, like recorders, all of those things don't happen, like any extra stuff that we want for our kids, not even extra. I mean, like, we're short pencils now in our schools. So, to me, that's kind of a little bit ridiculous.
It is.
So where do you get $4 million to replace a roof in an operating budget? Like, I see the operating budgets, there's not that kind of wiggle room in there.
You're right, there's not. And the other problem is that we have the no means no law. So if this were put on a separate warrant article and it were voted down, we would find ourselves in a really tricky situation about how to fix it and what to do.
Oh, because the voters said, no, we don't want to pay for a roof. You can't pay for a roof, even though it failed.
Correct, and that would be something that would go legal for the future steps. But we have our assistant superintendent who's going to jump in a little bit more color for that.
I also wanted to share, we do have a facilities trust fund, our capital reserve trust fund, and we do have funding in there. And we're actually, one of our articles this year, we're asking for $650,000 to add to that trust fund to continue to build it up because our repair costs and our maintenance costs are increasing so much. So that is an important piece. We do have, and it was in our deliberative presentation, how much funding is currently in there, and we're continuing to look ahead at what needs there are and continue to fund that so that we can pay for things like that. And that can hit, if we have, it might be for a planned roof in 3 years, but a boiler goes and we have to use that facilities trust fund to be able to fund that. We certainly can do that. So we would obviously go to that fund first. It's there for emergencies and there to help out, even out our costs. So that you're not asking taxpayers for $1 million for a roof one year, we can fund that over a number of years. So, but if we had a catastrophic roof issue and needed $4 million, you're right, Christine, we would have a very difficult time finding that in our budget. And we might need to get creative or figure something out there.
That's great. Don't worry. Thank you.
Oh, here we go.
I don't have my. Oh, sorry. Sorry. You know what? I'm gonna stop apologizing for asking a question. This is a good question. And Christine, maybe you can ask or you can get back to me. If we know we have structural problems, some internal problems with our schools. If something were to happen and a student got injured, what is our legal liability in that situation? And what's the I mean, it could be millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars in liability. How does our insurance work? What does this as a lawyer say about things like that? Because I look at dripping ceilings and think, what if part of that collapsed, or like whatever, or the electricity went.
Well, the portable kettle's on fire.
But really, like, what would it be our legal liability, and how would our insurance work in that case? I mean, are we looking at costing way more than what a bond would be to make a school that is safe?
So I think you bring up a really valuable point. It's certainly not something that, that was in the purview of the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee. I'll hand the mic over to Ms. Langworld, but also this is not a question that you were asked to prepare for.
That's a little more of a complex issue. First of all, we're confident that our schools are safe for students. Are they comfortable for students? Not always. I think one of our biggest challenges not only is space an issue as far as comfort, but certainly ventilation and heating. I know Amherst Middle School, it's been 98 degrees in those front classrooms on the second floor. We know a lot of learning is not taking place. Now, that's certainly not the whole year that happens at summertime, but we also have challenges where we can't regulate our heating as well as we would like to. We have freezing cold rooms and really hot rooms. So those are our ongoing issues and challenges. So I think our issues are, I don't worry about the safety of our students in our school buildings. I'm confident that our facilities director is ensuring that our buildings are where they need to be, where a roof isn't going to, fall in, certainly. We do have insurance. Primex is our insurance carrier, and when things like fires and portables happen, our insurance company does cover that minus our deductible. So while it's a lot of work and a lot of paperwork, Anna is still cleaning up stuff from our fire over the summer. We're still going through, wait, did that material come in? Is it in the right account? Do we get reimbursed yet? So it's a ton of work for us. So we don't like when those problems happen. Luckily, we have our insurance to cover that. But I'm confident in our buildings as far as safety. So I just
I didn't want to imply that they are unsafe, but if something were to happen with something that we knew was a problem and didn't fix, what happens?
And our insurance wouldn't cover us for something that, and I would have to look at our policy, and Amy would probably be able to better answer, but it would be unlikely that if we knew of an issue and then we tried to seek reimbursement, it could maybe not be reimbursed. I think we're aware of all of our issues and we're working towards fixing them. They might be more of a short-term fix rather than a long-term fix, though.
So adding a little bit of, I guess, I'm the color man today, right? So you guys did a facilities assessment back in 2017. And from that, you guys did a capital improvement plan you've been leveraging for some of the calculations that you're doing now, which is fantastic. So just to put a little color behind that, Roger and the rest of the administration team has really been looking at what deliberate improvements they're going to have to make, investments they're going to have to make in these buildings to continue to keep them safe. So, and to continue to keep them up. And so you're trying to do some advanced planning. It's hard to do that sort of thing in an ad hoc fashion, which is what you've got right now with the type of funding structure we're working with. Hence, trying to look at something a little more comprehensive, which really attacks the problem as an entire district and all the buildings at once. So congratulations to that. I think one other piece of color, since I have one, the buildings we all believe are safe and they can be safer. So there's a couple of categories to safety, aren't there? So there's life safety when it comes to fire and so forth. So there are several things that we found that could be safer. They could be brought up to code as an existing code. They're within norms, but for new buildings, we would want to do it a different way. We want to make it much safer. Also, unfortunately, we have to talk about other types of security as well, right? Intruder security. And with an existing building with portables outside the building, we could make that safer with a new building where all the students are within the building. For the middle school, as the entrance, we could make that building safer by redoing the entrance of that building so that somebody doesn't gain entry to the building without having to sign in, be vetted. So just a couple of.
Thank you, Brad and Christine. And I think you both just summed it up pretty nicely. And this is really why the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee was appointed by the SA 39 back in 2018. And it's why we're all here for this conversation tonight. We have some choices to make as a community. Do we want to continue investing in short-term solutions to maintain the status quo? We can do that. That's certainly a value proposition that is on the ballot March 8th. Or do we want to look at a more comprehensive plan and strategy for our town and for our students? And that's really what we try to do here with these plans and with the building, the proposal that's being presented. I see, Brian, you have the microphone. Comment?
Yeah, I want to expand on your question to Ms. Peril around class size, and as you alluded, Anna and Bethany and AMS, they've both done tremendous jobs finding space to keep class sizes where you're at. But this is probably for Daniel over here. Is the space up to code to what we expect? So the classroom size that we have in these buildings, would they meet modern classroom size code, what they're looking to do?
So there are dozens of rooms in these three buildings. So categorically say that none of them are up to New Hampshire Department of Education requirements would be accurate. There are some rooms that are up to the DOE standards, Department of Education. There are many of them that are not. It's really that simple. DOE has a rather thick little pamphlet of requirements, and it's a little complicated to read. But the short version is most of your spaces don't meet the DOE requirements. At the same time, I think it's a little bit of a false discussion to talk about just straight square footage because you have a lot of space. The trouble really is what we're finding in many school districts around the state, and Amherst is not unique in this regard, is that we just don't teach in 2022 the way we taught 50 years ago when these buildings were built. So it's great to have an 850 square foot classroom, and we might even have the right number of students in it at 36 square feet per student, which is the state, right? But when you turn that around and you say, okay, I don't need a 900 square foot classroom for a general classroom, but I do need 4 special education folks or interventionists, and we're going to put all 4 of them in the 900 or 850 square foot classroom. They're not getting the right type of students to do the proper instruction. It's just not the proper acoustic separation. It's really about configuration. We have the pie-shaped classrooms at the middle school with a proper acoustic separation.
Right. I think what's, at the middle school, what's interesting when we talk about square footage is those triangle classrooms that are, original to the 1972 construction of that building. That classroom is 900 square feet. However, because it's in the shape of a triangle, when you take out those corners, and anyone who's ever taught in one of those classrooms or walked through it, there's about 500 to 600 square feet of usable space because you can't really use the corners, and you have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, larger students in those spaces with the walls that are accordion style. And we recently had to replace one because it was a safety issue. They're reaching the end of their life, and they're costly to replace.
And you've got a terrific facilities team who's really worked hard to keep your buildings up and make safe. That's actually an industry term. We got to make it safe, right? I think anybody who really wants to drill deeper into how these spaces really should be configured and what kind of square footage you need should really get on the JFAC website because the district, all of the administrators and the educational staff and Banwell spent a lot of time together going through and actually doing an educational specification for each individual school. It's a full spreadsheet with every single space unit listed and what size it has to be and what it's for. The effort here was to make sure that you got the building you needed. Not everybody was happy, not everybody got every space they wanted, but certainly we met the requirements for what your educational vision is for the town of Amherst in the coming 3 years.
Right, so we are going on an hour and 15 minutes. I'm happy to stay here as long as we need. Are there any other questions from anyone in the room or on Zoom? Anyone on the committee? Anything we should mention that we have not? All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. I want to let everyone know that we have one more of these public Q&A sessions. It's going to be on Saturday, March 5th. That's the Saturday before you head to the ballot box. So another opportunity to ask your questions so that you can go on March 8th well informed. That is going to take place here at Wilkins as well. And I believe that's at 6:30, if I'm not mistaken. Which I could be. No, I'm sorry. I see my committee shaking their head.
I think it's 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock. Thank you, Terry. So 4 o'clock on Saturday, March 5th. We try to offer these meetings at a variety of days of the week, sometimes to accommodate different schedules and needs. So we hope you can join us for that. However, in the meantime, please continue to reach out to us. Submit your questions to the website through jfac.sau39.org. Utilize the Ask a Question feature. Take a look at the FAQs or visit us on Facebook and Instagram at Amherst, New Hampshire Home to School. I also just want to give a big thank you to all the volunteers on our committee. Like I mentioned earlier, this conversation began in 2018. And we've had a lot of different ideas and different folks from the community volunteering their time to get us where we are today. So thank you to everyone for that. And we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. So that's tuned in on Zoom.